is a pawn, and it is on square A2. At the beginning of the game, each player gets pawns. White has 8 pawns lined up on row 2, and black has 8 pawns lined up on row 7. Note that the white pawns move in this direction, and the black pawns move in this direction. Now let's talk about points. Each pawn is worth 1 point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. 8 total points for white, and because we know black also starts with 8 pawns, black has 8 points. This board has 16 pawns on it, 8 white pawns, 8 black pawns, totaling 16 points. Remember, white pawns line up on row 2, and black pawns line up on row 7. All right, now let's look at how pawns move. This pawn is on square D2. Before we move this pawn on D2, let's talk about moves a pawn can never make. They can never move sideways. They can never move backwards. And they can never move diagonally backwards. Now that we know they can never move sideways, backwards, and diagonally backwards, let's look at the 3 moves they can make, starting with the regular move. Pawns move 1 space forward for a regular move. And that's it. Remember, pawns are only allowed to move 1 space forward on a regular move. Now let's rewind the scene and talk about the capture move. Pawns capture pieces by moving forward diagonally 1 square left or right, but only when an opponent is in one of those squares. Okay, now let's look at some scenarios. The white pawn can either move forward diagonally left to capture, or it could simply do a regular move forward. The white pawn will choose to move diagonally left to capture, and when it does, it moves into the square and removes the captured piece from the board. Remember to place all your captured pieces off the board on your right. Now let's look at another capture scenario. This white pawn can either capture left or right, or simply move forward 1 space. This time, the pawn chooses to capture forward diagonally right. And don't forget to place your captured piece off the board to your right. Now let's talk about pawns getting stuck in front of each other. When a pawn has another piece directly in front of it, it is stuck. This means it cannot move unless it can capture out left forward diagonal or right forward diagonal. Let's say an opponent's pawn appears in front on a diagonal. Well, now the pawn can capture left forward diagonal and it is no longer stuck. It is important to note, here the white pawn went from file D, square 2, to file C, square 3. It will now stay on file C until it captures its way into another file. Here's our board again with the white pawns on row 2 and the black pawns on row 7. Now we will take turns moving 1 piece at a time, with white making the first move. But wait, one more move from the pawn called the special first move. Each pawn can move 2 spaces forward instead of 1 space on its first move. It looks like this. This pawn will move 2 spaces forward on its first move. Now it's black's turn to move, and in this case, black is going to choose to move the pawn on square D7 2 spaces forward to square D5. Notice that these 2 pawns in the center of the board are stuck. Currently, they cannot move. Now it's white's turn to move, and white is going to choose to move the pawn on square C2 1 space forward. Now it's black's turn to move, and black is going to choose to move the pawn on square F7 1 space forward. Now it's white's turn to move, and white is going to move the pawn on square C3. Now, because this pawn already made a first move, it can no longer do the special 2-space move. So the pawn on C3 can only move 1 square forward. Now it's black's turn to move, and black has a capture opportunity. Do you see it? That's right. The pawn on square D5 can now capture out of being stuck by taking the white pawn on square C4. Notice that the opponent playing black placed the white pawn on his or her right-hand side. Of course, from our angle, that looks like the left, but from black's angle, that is the right. Okay, now let's speed it up a little bit and watch this game finish. All right, that's the game. Let's see who won this practice round. If we count white's points on the right-hand side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 total points. Now, if we count the pieces that black captured, we see 1, 2, 3, 4 total points. A few things to notice about this board. The white pawn on E4, which is facing the black pawn on E5, are stuck. The white pawn on G7 is stuck behind another white pawn on G8, and it can't go anywhere. Another thing to notice is that when the pawns made it to the final row, for black, that would be row 1, and for white, that would be row 8, they stopped. Making it to the other side when you're a pawn is a really good thing, and we'll learn more in the future why it's so good. For now, just know pawns which make it to the other side will get an extra 2 points in the game of Pawn Wars. So if you remember, white captured 5 black pieces, and it has 2 pawns on the final row, row 8, worth 2 points each. White has captured a total of 9 points. 5 black points and 4 points, 2 each, for the pawns that made it to the other side. Black has captured 4 white pawns and has 2 pawns that made it to the other side, worth 2 points each, or a total of 4 points. Black earned 8 points in this game. This was a pretty close game. Black 8, white 9. White wins in this case. All right, now let's get you to the boards and play.